So one of the themes that was sort of hanging over signing day here today at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center was what was going on with Ohio State's defensive line. They'd already lost a commit earlier in this cycle in Justin Scott, a five-star guy. They were potentially losing another one in Eddrick Houston, but then Ryan Day leaves and takes a phone call, won't comment on whether or not it was from Houston, at least at that point, comes back in, and all of a sudden Edrick Houston confirms his commitment to Ohio State, sticks with this class. Andrew, how significant was that, not just for this class, but maybe most importantly for Larry Johnson, for a year where it looked like without him, this would have been a very uninspiring year from defensive line recruiting, to say the least?
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Edrick Houston signing saves the class. I don't think it does that. I think you still need more quantity and quality when you're talking about an Ohio State defensive line, but my goodness, does this change the way that you have to look at some things, I think, a little bit, because if this class did not have Eddrick Houston, you have one player on this defensive line and you have a 3-star commit, and that's it. So when you talk about what Ohio State gains from this on the field, it's a big deal to get Eddrick Houston and all these things, but we've kind of talked about this a couple of different times. I think it matters more for narrative's sake too, because there were all these talks about Larry Johnson's getting too old and programs are using this against him, and Ryan Day gave a pretty, I would say, impassioned defense of Larry Johnson. One of the things that he said, which I thought was pretty interesting, was a lot of these programs can talk about doing it, developing these unbelievable players. Larry Johnson's actually done it, and he's Ryan Day was pretty adamant that he believes that Larry Johnson's coming back next year, that Larry Johnson can continue to do this. So he gave a pretty he was behind him. He stood behind his defensive line coach, and it's a big deal for him just because, again, if you don't land Edrick Houston, every single gun of Ohio State fans, the guns of Ohio State fans are pointed at this defensive recruiting staff, and that's not a place you want to be. So massive win on the field. Edrick Houston's a great player. Massive win for what this does, just narrative sake, and proving that Ohio State still can get some of these guys on the defensive line.
And Ohio State was losing some other flips late in this process too, which had already kind of created some consternation, even though this is still a highly ranked class. But, Ryan Day and Larry Johnson are going to keep dealing with these rumors until Larry Johnson finally does retire. And maybe that's unfair, but when you have a 7 at the front of your age in this profession, whether that's fair or not, because there's a lot of other coaches coaching well into their 70s and being very successful at it, but it's going to be something that probably does get weaponized against you a little bit on the recruiting trail. Stephen, how much did just getting Edrick Houston, and I agree with Andrew, it's still as a whole doesn't look great for this class. They'll only have 2 guys coming in, the other guy being a much more developmental 3-star guy. But how critical was this maybe for Larry Johnson just to build on something, to have some sort of a positive finish to this class that can be something that builds into next year maybe?
Andrew says this cliche a lot. Sometimes you just got to see the ball go through the hoop. And I kind of compare Tony Alford and Larry Johnson in that way, is just when you're starting to doubt their ability to get it done, they get it done, right? Tony Alford and Larry Johnson both doing it in 2021 when Tony Alford landed 2 top 100 running backs, and Larry Johnson brings in Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau as top 10 recruits, Mike Hall as a top 60 recruit, and then Tyleek Williams, who has been kind of awesome, All-American level this year. And maybe those guys come back for a 4th year, maybe they don't. Who knows? We don't know that information yet. And we've seen a couple of cycles in a row here from both of those guys where it's okay, what's going on here? Tony Alford gets James Peoples, which is a pretty quality get. Now, I know he lost Jordan Lyle, but James Peoples is a quality get. And this is a big get for Larry Johnson. It's the ball can still go on the hoop is what Edrick Houston is, but I'm still worried at this point because these rumors have been around for 5, 6, 7 years at this point. And up to now, it didn't matter because it still got you Chase Young. It still got you a pretty good 2018 class. Even if it didn't pan out on the field, on paper, when you signed that 2018 class, there were a lot of good names like Teron Vincent and Tyreek Smith. It still got you that 21 class. It still got you Zach Harrison. It didn't matter yet. It didn't matter. It was just words. But it feels like players are starting to be attentive to it a little bit here, and it felt like the way Ryan Day talked about Larry Johnson today was very much that was a message to Edrick Houston and whoever Edrick Houston is in the 2025 class and the 2026 class. Because it's one thing to just be rumors that Larry Johnson has to deal with when he talks to us. It's another thing when it becomes a rumor that he's got to deal with when he's talking with parents and recruits who might hold the future of Ohio State's defensive line in their hands. And there's clearly an impact at this point, and that's why you have to be worried about those rumors now in a way you weren't worried about them 2 or 3 years ago.
A couple of years ago, it seemed like the NCAA might be trending towards allowing these teams, every team, to open up its assistants, not be limited to the 10 countable assistants anymore. I think if that had happened, Larry Johnson might still be here, but you would have another defensive line coach in the mix. Maybe he would be a different role. He wouldn't even be counted as an assistant coach anymore. You could have him here still doing things. But because they're still restricted to just the 10, and because Larry Johnson, again, on the other side of things, like this defensive line this year was so productive, was so important to why this defense was so good. And as Ryan Day keeps mentioning, keeps hinting, this could still be a very good defensive line next year in terms of the guys who have NFL decisions yet to make, who haven't announced those things. And Larry Johnson's recruitment and development would be a big part of that too. So we're just in this weird kind of transitional period, and I think if with those decisions still hanging out there, if they had also lost Edrick Houston, I think it would have been a really tough offseason for Larry Johnson, for the program, because then now you're delving into the portal, trying to scramble to find somebody else to help. To land someone like him, it's not so much what it means for this next season, it's what it means for you 2 or 3 years down the line, that you don't feel that hole the way that they have felt it, frankly, in some other positions over the last couple of years from recruiting failures that happened a couple of years before that. We're going to talk a lot more about this on Buckeye Talk. Get that wherever you can find podcasts, and get the text 614-350-3315. All those updates as they were happening were coming straight to your phone from cleveland.com.